Hey everyone, welcome to my complete Blu-ray and DVD collection July 2020. I usually do these videos in June, but I just kind of ran out of time this June due to personal stuff, so here I am in July trying to get them updated. If you guys haven't watched any of my previous collection videos, essentially I just go through them bit by bit and talk a little bit about each movie. You know, I set the camera up in front of my Blu-ray shelf and then kind of go through each one by one, and yeah. I'll try to mention where I got these movies, but sometimes I just don't remember, and sometimes they were gifts, so I don't really know, where the person that gave it to me got it from, but yeah. So yeah, let's not waste any more time, let's get started. First up is a Stanley Kubrick 3-pack that has 2001, Clockwork Orange, and The Shining. I've seen this too, haven't gotten around to watching this one yet. I'm not the hugest Stanley Kubrick fan. I appreciate his movies, but I'm not the type of person that thinks he's one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. I got this from Best Buy. Next up is the Alien Anthology. I've only seen the first two Alien movies and Alien Covenant, which I know is weird. I haven't watched Alien 3 or Alien Resurrection yet, which is what's included in here. I really love Alien and Aliens. They're two of the best sci-fi movies ever made. I've heard the other ones aren't as good, which is why I haven't watched them yet, but I'll probably get around to watching them at some point. Next up is Almost Famous, the bootleg cut. I got this from a local retail store. I really love Almost Famous. It's one of my favorite screenplays ever. I actually have a physical copy of the screenplay. I actually haven't watched the director's edition yet, just the theatrical edition, but I'm sure that the director's edition is good. Then I have Blade Runner, the final cut. For those of you that don't know, there are multiple different versions of Blade Runner. There's like 7 different versions. This one only includes the final cut though, and it's both Blu-ray and DVD, which I like. This one I picked up from the $5 dump bin at Walmart. I actually only watched Blade Runner for the first time recently, and it is really good. I really love pulpy type A sci-fi, which is really what that movie is. I haven't watched 2049 yet, but I will at some point. Next up is Chucky 7-movie collection. It has the first 7 movies, not the remake. Slasher movies are a guilty pleasure of mine, and I haven't seen all of the Chucky movies, but the ones I do, I just really enjoy the stupidity of them. They're the type of movies that are self-aware of kind of how dumb they are and aren't afraid to embrace and appreciate that, which I really love. I love when a movie knows what it is and owns it. Next up is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I actually watched this movie in a film class and ended up writing a paper on it for another film class. I think that's actually probably my favorite movie that I've watched in a film class, at least so far. It got me into wuxia movies and foreign action movies. Next up is the Dark Knight Trilogy Special Edition. One of the greatest trilogies ever. The Dark Knight is probably Christopher Nolan's magnum opus. I really like this box set. The only thing I don't really like about it is how this Blu-ray thing comes off. Let me zoom out a bit. This Blu-ray thing comes off, and I just don't really like that. Makes me wish I had a stand-up case. Maybe I should get around to buying one of those. But yeah, what can I say? I really love Christopher Nolan. I really love this trilogy of movies. It's probably the best trilogy of superhero movies ever made, although the Raimi Spider-Man would be a close second. And I actually have a Christopher Nolan ranking coming up whenever Tenet gets released. Whenever that will be. Then I have Diary of a Wimpy Kid. People my age grew up with Diary of a Wimpy Kid. For a lot of them, it's kind of our It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. A series or a franchise where the main character is really a horrible person, and we don't really root for him, but we enjoy watching him get into horrible situations. And I think the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie does a really good job translating it to the book. And I think the first Diary of a Wimpy Kid movie does a really good job translating the book to film form. Next up is the Die Hard collection. It has 5 movies, all on Blu-ray. The original Die Hard is one of the best action movies ever made, if not the best. I've seen Die Hard 1, 2, 4, and 5, and I'll get around to watching 3 at some point. I really love Die Hard 1, and the other ones are okay, I guess. I've heard Die Hard 3 is the second best, and that's the only one I haven't seen, so maybe I like that one more, but yeah. Next up is Dirty Dancing 30th Anniversary Edition. It's Blu-ray DVD combo pack with digital. That movie is very much a dumb 80s movie, but I love dumb 80s movies. Who doesn't? Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey both are really good in it. It has some really awesome dance numbers and an awesome theme song. I picked this up from a $5 dump bin in Walmart. Next up is The Disaster Artist. I actually reviewed this movie a while back on my channel. I think it's good. I just don't think it's quite as good as It could be. I'm a really big fan of the book by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell, and I think the movie, while not being bad, is very much about something different. The movie probably would have been better if it just would have claimed to be something else, a movie about The Room but wouldn't have tied itself to the book at all. Next up is Django Unchained, Quentin Tarantino movie. I'm not the biggest Quentin Tarantino fan, but I really appreciate his auteur style. I haven't actually watched this one yet. I know it's crazy because that's supposed to be one of his better ones, but I'll get around to watching it at some point. Next up is Do the Right Thing, Blu-ray DVD combo pack. I got both this and Django at a retail store in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I watched Do the Right Thing for the first time in a film class, and while I don't love the movie, I do like it. I think it's an interesting perspective on race that you won't usually see in a Hollywood movie. Spike Lee is definitely a very preachy filmmaker, so if you don't like that stuff, you probably should shy away from that movie, but if you don't mind that, then it's definitely worth the watch. Next up is Don John. I got this from a local retail store. Don John is actually a really good movie. It's a great subversion of the romantic comedy genre. Joseph Gordon-Levitt does a great job writing and directing it, and him, Scarlett Johansson, and Julianne Moore really do a good job acting-wise in this movie. It's a movie that tackles porn addiction, which isn't really explored by a lot of mainstream Hollywood movies, and I think the movie does a good job exploring that. Next up is the Fast and Furious 8 movie collection. These movies are big, loud, and dumb, and they know it, and I love them for it. I kind of think about these movies the same way I think about the Child's Play movies. They know what they are, they own what they are, they don't try to be anything more. Yeah. Next up is Galaxy Quest. I really love self-aware movies. I love Scream, I love Deadpool, I love Community, I love South Park, I love satire, and Galaxy Quest does a great job satirizing kind of pulpy science fiction, things like Star Trek or Stargate. Tim Allen, Sigourney Weaver, Alan Rickman, they're all really good in this movie, and it's definitely worth a watch, because I think this movie is underappreciated. Next up is Get Out, Jordan Peele's directorial debut in a horror movie with social commentary. I got this from a Target. I liked but don't love that movie. I think it gets a bit more credit than it deserves. I think it's a wonderfully made movie from a writing, directing, acting standpoint. I just don't think that some of the themes and social commentary work as well as they could. Next up is Glass. I would consider myself a fan of M. Night Shyamalan, especially the East Row 177 trilogy. That movie, I reviewed it when it came out, and I think it's good. It's a satisfying enough conclusion to the trilogy, but it really wasn't as good as it could have been. I'm a massive Blumhouse fan, and they're only as good as their creators are, but they know that, and they know that when they take the risk of giving a director full creative control, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, sometimes they're in the middle. Next up is Good Will Hunting. I really love this movie. This is just my go-to feel-good movie. Matt Damon, Robin Williams, and Minnie Driver, and even some of the smaller roles like Ben Affleck and Stellan Skarsgård are just all really good in it. But really the best thing about that movie is the screenplay by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. I actually own a physical copy of that one too, and it's truly one of the best screenplays ever written. It might be my favorite screenplay of all time. That's just exactly what you want from a feel-good movie. Let's move over to the next line. Next up is Goodfellas. I got this from a $5 dump bin and Walmart. That's another movie that I watched in a film class for the first time, and I really like it. I'm not the biggest Scorsese fan or the biggest fan of gangster movies, but that really is as good of a movie as everyone says it is. Next up is The Graduate. I really love that movie. I love coming-of-age movies, and I love kind of awkward comedies like that. That's truly one of the best movies ever made. It's just as good as everyone says it is. Next up is Gran Torino. I really like Clint Eastwood, both as an actor and a director, and I really think that this is an underrated movie by him. Well, yes, its portrayal of racism is fairly straightforward and exactly what you would expect from a Hollywood movie. It still does a good job exploring its themes and ideas. Next up is the Grease 3 movie collection. I got that from a local retail store as well. I actually was in the play Grease in high school, so I have a bit of nostalgia for the movie. This pack includes Grease, Grease 2, and Grease Live. I've actually only watched Grease so far, which I know I should at least watch Grease Live, because I heard that was really good. And I probably will at some point. It's just, too much stuff to watch and not enough time. Next up is Halloween 2018. Like I said before, I'm a massive Blumhouse fan. I think this might have been the This might have been the first Blumhouse movie I saw in a theater. I have a review for this movie up on my channel too, and this movie's good. It's not great, but it's good, and I'm still excited for Halloween Kills this October, hopefully this October. Next up is Genesis History. This is just a documentary talking about kind of the historical evidence that supports that the Bible is real and that Christianity is real and all that. I haven't watched it yet, but it was a gift, and I'll probably watch it at some point, because I'm a little bit interested in stuff like that. Next up is the Harry Potter 8-film collection. I am a pretty massive Harry Potter fan. One could argue that that was my generation's Star Wars, or the generation between mine and my parents, like my older siblings. I feel like that movie franchise gets overlooked, because it really is a great series. Next up is Hereditary. I like but don't love A24 movies. I think they've made good dramas, but their horror movies are kind of iffy. I haven't actually watched Hereditary yet, so I can't give my opinion on that movie specifically, but I've heard it's great. I've heard it's the best horror movie of the decade, so I'll watch it at some point. Next up is the Hobbit trilogy, Unexpected Journey, Desolation of Smaug, Battle of the Five Armies. You know, those movies obviously are not as good as the Lord of the Rings movies. They didn't really need to be 3 of them. There should have just been like 1 or 2 maybe, but they're still good for what they are, you know. Martin Freeman and Ian McKellen and Richard Armitage are all excellent in them. Peter Jackson's flair for shooting big, grand, just visceral cinema still very much shows in those movies, but they lack the character development and practical effects that made the Lord of the Rings series great. Next up is Home Alone and Home Alone 2 on DVD Blu-ray combo pack. Got those from Target. I really love Home Alone and Home Alone 2. Those are just 2 of my favorite Christmas movies ever. Home Alone 2 is probably one of the very few template sequels that manages to recapture the magic of the original. They're just great family movies all around. Next up is Hunger Games 1 and Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1. I think I have the other 2 movies with my DVDs instead of with my Blu-rays, so we'll get to those a bit later. I liked the Hunger Games movies okay. They're not as good as some people said they were, but they're certainly not the worst thing to come out of the, you know, young adult craze of the 2000s. We all know which one was. Yeah, next up is Inception. Have not watched this yet, but I will, because I'm going to do a Christopher Nolan ranking when Tenet comes out. I've heard that's one of his best movies, one of his more visceral movies, and I'm sure I'll enjoy it. Next up is It. This is another one of my favorite movies of the decade. Andy Muschietti does a great job directing it. The child actors are fantastic. Bill Skarsgård, holy crap, he's so good in this movie. I really can't wait to see what Andy Muschietti does with The Flash. Next up is the Lego Movie and the Lego Movie 2, the second part. I got this from a local thrift store, and this was a gift. I'm really disappointed that they're apparently discontinuing the series, because I think they could have made a third one and made a solid trilogy. I don't have the Lego Batman movie or the Lego Ninjago movie, but I'll pick those up at some point. These movies really made me love Phil Lord and Chris Miller as directors. It really showed off their talent and just made me appreciate their style of filmmaking. Like I said before, I really, really love self-awareness and satire, and I just love movies that understand their place in popular culture as well as these movies do. Next up is Life of Pi. Now, Life of Pi is one of my favorite books ever. I think it's just such an interesting and philosophical look at religion and life and just so many different themes that book tackles, and the movie does a good job exploring most of those things as well as a visual medium can. Next up is Maze Runner: The Scorch Trials. That trilogy was okay. I think I have the first one also with my DVDs. Like the Hunger Games, they weren't the worst thing to come out of the young adult craze, but they certainly weren't the best. Let's move on. Starting this little section will be Mad Max The Road Warrior and Mad Max Fury Road, which are the second and the fourth Mad Max movies, respectively. I haven't watched any of those yet, but I will at some point. I've heard that these 2 are the 2 best ones, so, I'll probably enjoy those more. I got both of these from, these both are Blu-ray DVD combo packs, and I got them from the $5 dump bin in Walmart. Next up is Chronicles of Narnia, Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I actually made a video explaining why this is my favorite of the 3 Narnia movies. It's a movie that's vastly different from the book, but actually makes changes that make the story better. I really love the Chronicles of Narnia trilogy, and I really wish they were more appreciated. Next up is the Neverending Story. I got that movie from Best Buy, I believe. That's another movie that used to be a big part of my childhood, and I really need to rewatch it because it's been forever since I've seen it, but I love fantasy. I love, things like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Percy Jackson, and having a movie that just appreciates fantasy literature is awesome. Next up is The Outsiders, the complete novel. That's one of my favorite movies and one of my favorite books ever. It's one of the few movies that I think translates the book exactly. The cast, writing, directing, it's truly excellent. The Godfather might be Francis Ford Coppola's most well-known movie, but The Outsiders is probably his best. Next up is the Planet of the Apes Legacy Collection and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I have the other two movies in the prequel trilogy on DVD, so we'll get to them later. I haven't actually watched any of the movies in the original series, but I will at some point. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes is one of my favorite movies, if not my favorite movie of the past decade. The things that Andy Serkis and Matt Reeves do in that movie they truly elevate blockbuster filmmaking. Next up is Pirates of the Caribbean 1 and 3. The first Pirates of the Caribbean is just, it's such a great movie. It's adventurous, it's fun, it's probably my favorite swashbuckling adventure movie. It's probably one of my favorite movies ever. And the other ones after that are fine. They each have their own set of pros and cons. Next up is Power Rangers. That movie was exactly what you want from a Power Rangers movie. You know, it's dumb, it's corny, but it knows it is and owns it. Next up is Prisoners. Haven't watched that yet, but I really do need to get into Denis Villeneuve because he's really starting to work his way up in the film world. Next up is Rango. That's just a really fun, quirky animated movie. Gore Verbinski's, distinct visual flair is all over that movie, and that's very much worth checking out. Next up is Red Dawn, the original and the remake. I actually don't mind the remake. I know a lot of people hate it, but I certainly don't dislike it at all. It has a cool premise. They're both very much America F yeah movies, but, could be worse. Next up is Revenge of the Nerds. That's another kind of fun, classic, dumb 80s movie. It's a movie that I do appreciate since I'm such a big nerd. Yes, I'll admit that there are aspects of the movie that don't hold up at all. If you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. There's a scene in the movie that I really dislike that I think really hurts the movie, but that doesn't mean we can't appreciate the aspects of the movie that do hold up. Next up is Schindler's List. I really love Steven Spielberg. He's probably my favorite filmmaker of all time, and so it surprises people when they tell them I haven't actually watched this movie yet. I certainly will at some point. I understand how important it is, but it's a movie that, from what I understand, is not the type of movie you want to rewatch over and over. When I'm in the mood for it at some point, I'll certainly watch it, but yeah. Next up is the live-action Scooby-Doo movie, which is my go-to guilty pleasure movie. That is one of the dumbest, I hate to use this word, forgive me for using it, but it is one of the most retarded movies ever made, and I love it so much. The cast of this movie, from Freddie Prinze Jr. to Sarah Michelle Gellar, Linda Cardellini, even Mr. Bean is in this movie. All are outstanding, and even they don't hold a candle to Matthew Lillard, which is just genuinely perfectly cast as Shaggy. He is the only actor who I think can take Casey Kasem's place as the voice of Shaggy. Next up is Scream, a 5-film set. Now, this collection actually has Scream 1, 2, and 3, and then 2 documentaries about the making of the Scream movies. One called Still Screaming, one called Scream: The Inside Story. I really love the Scream movies. I did a ranking of these movies not that long ago, and I haven't watched these 2 documentaries yet, but I will at some point. Next up is Secondhand Lions. Now, this I also got from a $5 dump bin at Walmart, and I gotta say, this is one of my favorite movies ever made. It's definitely in my top 10. And the reason that I'm singling this movie out is because no one ever talks about this movie. This might be the most underrated film ever made. Michael Caine, Robert Duvall, Haley Joel Osment are all outstanding in this movie. And I can't praise this movie enough. I love it so much. Next up is Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows. I like the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies well enough. They're fine. They're a different take on the character, and, they're fine. Next up is Spaceballs. This is truly one of the best spoof comedies ever made. I got this from Walmart. I was so happy to be able to find this on a Blu-ray DVD combo pack because older movies aren't really released on Blu-ray DVD combo packs very often. This movie very much could have defined my taste in humor. I love parody, I love satire, I love self-awareness, and just that movie really, really defined that for me. Next up is Spirited Away. This is the only Studio Ghibli movie I have, but I'm definitely looking to get more of them. When I first watched this, I actually watched it with my parents, and I didn't really know what to think of it because it wasn't really what I expected since I'm not the biggest anime fan. But once I thought about it more, the more I did really like it, and I'm looking forward to watching more Miyazaki movies. Next up is Split. Like I said before, not the biggest M. Night Shyamalan fan, but I do appreciate his good movies. Split is one of the better ones. I don't think it's the best, but it is definitely up there. James McAvoy's really good in it, and the kind of ideas it explores, even though I don't necessarily agree with them, are interesting. So at the start of the last section is A Star is Born. Haven't watched that movie yet, but my parents were both big fans of it when they watched it, and I know it won all types of awards, so I'll definitely watch it at some point. Then we have the first 4 Disney Star Wars movies. Haven't picked up Rise of Skywalker yet. You know, I don't hate Disney Star Wars as much as some people do. Some people think it's the worst thing ever. I don't think it's the worst thing ever, but each movie definitely has their own set of flaws. Next up is the first 2 Kelvin Timeline Star Trek movies. Haven't picked up Star Trek Beyond yet. I really love Star Trek 2009. It's just such a fun, happy adventure movie. Star Trek Into Darkness isn't as good, but is still worth watching. Next up is Super 8, one of the most underrated movies of the past decade. It's J.J. Abrams kind of reining himself in after Star Trek and doing a smaller movie. This movie is way ahead of its time, too. It really set the stage for things like It and Stranger Things, and it's definitely worth checking out if you like those 2 things. Next up is the Superman Motion Picture Anthology, 1978 through 2006. I watched the first one of these movies, and I don't know, I just didn't really vibe with it. I understand the cultural impact that Superman the movie had, given how it was the first ever superhero blockbuster, but I don't know, I just didn't really vibe with it. I'll watch the rest of them at some point, but Next up is Titanic. I'm a pretty big James Cameron fan, I would say, but I haven't watched that movie yet. I know this video is a lot of me saying, oh, I haven't watched that yet, but I just, it's a 3.5 hour movie, I'll watch it at some point when I'm in the mood for watching it, but yeah. Next up is Top Gun. This is another movie that I just don't really vibe with. I know so many people love it. They love the feel-good feel of the movie, and I get that, but I just don't vibe with this movie as much as a lot of other people do. Next up is the 4 Toy Story movies. One of the best movie franchises ever. I'll probably do a ranking of those not too long from now. Toy Story 4 was one of my favorite movies from this past year, and Toy Story 3 is probably my favorite movie the year it came out. Next up is Tron Legacy. The Tron movies are good. I'm really surprised that they never caught on. They're both really big cult classics more than anything. I think I like Tron Legacy slightly more than Tron the original, but I don't know. I really hope that we get a Tron 3 someday, because the ideas behind those movies are really interesting. Next up is Tremors, A Cold Day in Hell. I really, really love the Tremors movies because they're dumb and stupid and know that. I haven't watched A Cold Day in Hell yet. I've only watched the first 5, and I've watched the TV show. But I'll watch that at some point. I'll maybe do a ranking of those movies too, since there's only 6 of them. Next up is Uncut Gems, another A24 movie. I liked it a fair amount. Adam Sandler's great in it. It's really, really a stressful movie. What I mean by that is that it's much more stressful than it is suspenseful because Adam Sandler plays a gambling addict. It's worth watching if you like that type of movie, but if you don't, I wouldn't recommend it. Next up is Under the Skin, another A24 movie starring Scarlett Johansson. I actually just watched that recently. That's the type of movie you have to really sit down and pay attention to. You can't be on your phone or making food or something while watching it. You really have to give it your full attention. And it is a really well-made, well-shot, well-acted movie. And capping off the Blu-ray section is We're the Millers, the extended cut. Got this from a $5 dump bin in Walmart, I think. What can I say? This movie is a raunchy comedy. It's hilarious. It's funny. It's everything you want it to be. So, yeah. Alrighty, that's it for... that barely even fits. That's it for the Blu-ray portion of my video. Let's move on. So this shelf is where I just keep my normal DVDs. Most of these I want to upgrade to Blu-ray at some point, and I probably will, but that costs time and money, so yeah. Let's go ahead and get started. Sorry about the glare. First up is Lego The Adventures of Clutch Powers. This is just a fun, direct-to-DVD Lego movie I got when I was a kid. Alex Rider, Operation Stormbreaker. I haven't read these books. I've heard that the books are a lot better than the movie. The movie itself is fine. American History X. I really like this movie. Edward Norton's excellent. The writing is really good. And it's just an interesting take on racism that you usually don't see in a Hollywood movie. Art School Confidential. Fun indie movie that somebody at my local comic book store recommended. It's kind of crude, but it is fun. It's an interesting perspective on the art world. Back to the Future, the complete trilogy. First, Back to the Future is one of the best movies ever made. One of my favorites ever. Robert Zemeckis' probably his best movie, as much as I love Forrest Gump. 2 and 3 are fine. They're not as bad as some people say they are, but they're not great. Beavis and Butthead Do America. Fun movie based off the animated series. Better Off Dead. Hilarious comedy starring John Cusack. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Keanu Reeves before he became the best person on the planet. The Blind Side, good inspirational movie, Sandra Bullock's excellent in it. Yeah, next up is The Breakfast Club, one of my favorite movies ever, probably the best high school movie ever, John Hughes' magnum opus, one of the best movies ever made. Next up is Bridge to Terabithia. This one is actually a Blu-ray, but because it's the size of DVDs, I keep it here. It's from Blockbuster, back when Blockbusters were a thing. That's a really good movie. It's a tad bit different from the book, but I'm okay with most of the changes. Next up is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the 1992 movie. Now, I love the series Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's arguably my favorite series of all time. The movie in itself is okay. Christine Swanson's kind of fun in it. Donald Sutherland's good. Luke Perry, rest in peace. But it's okay. A Christmas Story, one of the best comedies ever made. Some of those iconic lines ever. Truly a great Christmas comedy. Cloverfield, I really love Matt Reeves' movies, and I like J.J. Abrams. This movie is okay. I think 10 Cloverfield Lane is better, but it's a lot better than the Cloverfield Paradox. This franchise was kind of a victim of J.J. Abrams' mystery box and lack of planning ahead. Dazed and Confused, fun stoner comedy. Diary of a Wimpy Kid 2 and 3, so popular among people my age. I actually like all 3 of these movies because, there's only 3 of them. Next up is Donnie Darko, one of the best cult classic movies ever made, one of my personal favorites. Dracula Untold, fun enough, mindless, monster popcorn flick. Dude, Where's My Car, an abomination of cinema. 8 Below, fun, inspirational movie, good performance from Paul Walker, rest in peace. Aragon, butchers the book, but has some good CGI. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, what a great kids movie, one of Steven Spielberg's best. Family Guy, Blue Harvest, something, Dark Side Guy, and It's a Trap. Fun trilogy of Star Wars parodies. Ferris Bueller's Day Off, one of the best teen comedies ever, one of my favorite movies ever made. Flight of the Navigator, such a good kids' 80s movie. And closing off this shelf is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Haven't watched that yet, but I bet that's interesting. Starting off this shelf is Ghostbusters 1 and 2. I don't know, I don't love those movies as much as some people do. Some people say they're the greatest comedies ever, or at least the first one is, and they're funny. The chemistry between the cast is great, but G.I. Joe, The Rise of Cobra, fun, mindless popcorn flick. Godspell. This movie is based off the play by Stephen Schwartz, I believe. This is actually a really good movie. You don't see very many movies based off this type of play, but I think that movie does a good job. The Goonies, classic 80s adventure movie. The Green Mile. Haven't watched this movie yet, but I've heard it's one of the best Stephen King movies and that Michael Clarke Duncan's really good in it. I'll watch it at some point. Hoodwinked. This movie was actually the first ever full-length, independent CGI movie. And I really like this movie. I think it's very fun. This movie needs more of a fandom. Hot Pursuit, another fun comedy starring John Cusack. Hot Shots Part 1 and 2. Like I said before, I really love spoof comedies, and these movies are 2 of the best. The first one makes fun of Top Gun, the second one makes fun of Rambo. These movies are both really hilarious. Hunger Games 2, I have 1 and 3 on my Blu-rays. Like I said, this franchise was fine. It wasn't the best to come out of that fad, but it wasn't the worst. Hugo, I'm pretty sure this is the only kid-friendly movie Scorsese's ever made, and it's pretty good. Ice Age 1 and 2, Blue Sky Animation, I like them. They're not Pixar, but they're certainly better than something like Illumination. Independence Day, what a fun Taco Bell movie, just a mindless popcorn flick. Indiana Jones 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a bonus disc. I like that franchise. I don't love it as much as some people do, but I like it. Jurassic World, another fun, kind of mindless popcorn flick. Juno, fun indie movie. Ellen Page is really great in it. Jason Reitman wrote a really great script for that. Yeah, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. Like I said before, I'm not a diehard Tarantino fan, but I really like both of the Kill Bill movies, or he really considers them one movie, and they really are just one long movie that was released separately. I really love action movies, and seeing a movie that is just a tribute to action movies is something I really appreciate. The Karate Kid 1, 2, 3, and 4, that franchise is pretty solid. I watched the first season of Cobra Kai and thought that was pretty good too. Kung Fu Panda, fun DreamWorks movie. It's no Shrek, but it's still pretty good. Lord of the Flies, 2 different versions. I read this book in, I believe it was 9th grade, and bought 2 movies. This one was better. Napoleon Dynamite, such a fun sleeper hit comedy. And Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Like I said before, I think this franchise is really underappreciated, and I hope the Netflix series is good. Moving on to the next shelf. Starting off this shelf is Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian. This is probably the weakest of the 3, but it's still solid. Neverending Story 1 and 2. Even though I have Neverending Story 1 on Blu-ray, I probably will give this away at some point, but yeah. Maze Runner 1. Like I said before, decent enough young adult franchise. Not Harry Potter, but no, way better than Twilight. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, this is a really good movie. It's really heartwarming, really touching, and I really love a movie about movies. Mr. Bean's Holiday, this movie is an HD DVD back when those were a thing. That's a really fun comedy. Rowan Atkinson made everybody laugh while barely even saying a word. One Crazy Summer, another really fun comedy starring John Cusack. Paul Blart Mall Cop movie, one of my favorite movies from when I was a kid. Percy Jackson and the Olympian's Lightning Thief, don't know why I have this abomination, but yeah. Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 4, I have 1 and 3 with my Blu-rays. Like I said, Pirates of the Caribbean 1 is really good, and the rest of them are okay. Princess Bride, what a great movie, probably the best romantic comedy ever made. I love swashbuckling adventure movies, and truly this movie is one of the best ever. Over here we have Pulp Fiction, probably Quentin Tarantino's best movie. I know it was the first one that was really successful. I really love this movie. It's a movie that just has some of the best dialogue ever, some of the best acting ever, and really need to upgrade that to Blu-ray. Raising Arizona, a really fun comedy starring Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter, I believe. This is the type of movie you look for if you want kind of a stupid but also kind of raunchy comedy. Reservoir Dogs, Quentin Tarantino's first full-length movie. I have not watched this yet, but I certainly will at some point. Rise of the Planet of the Apes and War for the Planet of the Apes. I have Dawn with my Blu-rays. Really need to upgrade those 2 movies because that's just all in all a great trilogy. Rodan, I haven't watched that yet, but fun. It'll probably be a fun, corny monster movie. The Sandlot, such a fun, inspirational kids sports movie. The Seeker, I never read The Darkest Rises, but this movie's pretty solid. Shawshank Redemption, probably the second best Stephen King adaptation ever. We all know what's number 1. This movie is truly great. It's inspirational, hopeful, it'll leave you crying, but man, this is a great movie. Shredder Man Rules, fun Nickelodeon movie. Yeah. Simpsons movie, really entertaining. If you like the Simpsons cartoon, you'll like that movie. Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. I saw this movie in theaters when it came out, but I have no memory of it. I must have been really little at the time, because it's rare for me to just have no memory of a movie, or have barely any memory of a movie, but I have barely any memory of that. Next up is Shrek 2. I need to get the rest of the Shrek movies, because they really helped shape my childhood and my sense of humor. Short Circuit. That's another movie that I have seen, I just don't really remember it very well. I don't know. Next up is 16 Candles. This is, I believe, John Hughes' first full-length movie, and it's pretty good, even though there's some characters that don't hold up, like Farmer Ted. The movie overall, I think, holds up. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. I'm not the biggest South Park fan, but I do appreciate them just because I love satire so much, and the movie's no exception. Southland Tales, I got this movie because it's the same director as Donnie Darko, and I thought, might be worth checking out. I can genuinely say it's one of the weirdest and probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's overly convoluted, the characters are bland, it makes no sense. Yeah, avoid that movie. Stand By Me, probably my favorite film ever made. That's my movie right there. That's probably the best Stephen King adaptation ever. Let's move on to the next shelf. Alrighty. This shelf, I have the 6 main Star Wars movies, as well as the Clone Wars movie and documentary about the making of Star Wars. If you don't know me, I'm a pretty massive Star Wars fan. The Clone Wars movie is but the show is awesome. And I haven't watched this documentary yet, but I should. Next up is Swiss Family Robinson. This is a fun movie I liked when I was a kid about a family that gets trapped on an island. I have Terminator 1 and 3 on DVD. I'll probably get a collection whenever the last Terminator movie comes out, but let's be fair, who knows when the last Terminator movie is going to be. Transformers 1, 2, and 3. People hate these movies. I don't hate them. They're good for what they are, which is mindless popcorn flicks. Tremors 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The first 2 are definitely the best, and the other ones are okay. Tron, the original. Fun sci-fi action-adventure movie. Surprised it never caught on more than it did. Troy, interesting take on the Iliad in live action, you know, nothing spectacular, but good. Unbreakable, M. Night Shyamalan's best movie probably. Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson are really good in it. Need to upgrade that to Blu-ray. Uncle Buck, one of the better John Hughes movies. I did a ranking of his movies a while back, and this one's definitely towards the top. Vacation, such a great, funny comedy. Chevy Chase and Beverly D'Angelo are so good in it. Yeah, The Village, haven't watched this yet. It's M. Night Shyamalan's fourth movie, I believe. I've heard it's one of the better ones, but I haven't watched it yet, so I don't know. What's Eating Gilbert Grape? I haven't read the novel this is based on, but I've heard it's really good. Johnny Depp and Leonardo DiCaprio are excellent in this movie. I think it was Leo's first Oscar nomination, and it's well deserved. Weird Science. I like this movie well enough, but if you've seen my ranking, you know, this is my least favorite movie that John Hughes directed. You know, it's fine. We're the Millers. I haven't gotten rid of this yet, but I will at some point because I have the Blu-ray. Warhorse. Really good. Surprisingly good Steven Spielberg movie. You know, the main character of this movie is a horse. It's not the horse's rider. It's actually the horse, and I don't know. It's a pretty good adventure war movie. Next up, I have a 3-pack of 3 Clint Eastwood movies: Every Which Way But Loose, Any Which Way You Can, and Honky Tonk Man. I've only seen these 2, and they're both pretty good. And then at the end here, I have just some miscellaneous stuff I've picked up over time. Green Day International Super Videos. This is a collection of Green Day's music videos. And Green Day is my favorite band. Alfred Hitchcock, 21 movies, or 20 movies. How many is it? 20 movies, yeah. Not a diehard Alfred Hitchcock fan, but I do appreciate his work in cinema. A Walk in the Sun, The North Star, Count of Monte Cristo, and Zorro. These are 2-packs. I don't know why I have these exactly. They just kind of showed up on my DVD shelf one day. I think they were my dad's, but yeah, that's it for this shelf. Let's move on to the next one.